Guys, what's going on? Happy Friday. Today we're going to talk about how deals die.
You better get fired up.
That gets me going. I love that. Happy Friday, guys. I apologize. My voice is a little under the weather, but we're chugging through, man. We're going to get it done, right? Because that's what we do. Today I'm going to give you the top 10 reasons in my experience that deals fall apart, right? And yes, it's entertaining to listen to these 10 reasons that a deal falls apart. But if you're a realtor, especially, but even if you're a seller or buyer, it's great to know these 10 reasons because there are things you can proactively do to mitigate the risk, right? So let's start, and these tend to go in order with a few asterisks or oddities at the end, right? The escrow deposit. I'll tell you, probably it doesn't happen often, but I'd say maybe I don't know, 5% of the time, you're going to get an offer and the buyer just doesn't get their deposit in on time. Traditionally, unless you change the rules of a Florida contract, you've got 3 days after the acceptance of an agreement to get your escrow deposit in, right? That deposit could be 5, 10, 20, whatever $1,000. It doesn't matter what it is, but that is your consideration for the transaction, right? If you don't get it in, even though you intend to purchase the property, you've got the financing, everything is signed, you are out of contract as a buyer. Doesn't mean the seller won't still work with you, but they don't have to. So you risk as a buyer, let's say you got 3 days and it's day 4, you still haven't made that deposit. You risk the seller having a better offer in their back pocket, and now they cancel your offer and move forward with that other one. What recourse do you have as a buyer? None. You should have got your deposit in on time, right? So to protect yourself as a buyer, if you're serious, be prepared for that. Realtors, make sure that you set expectations. I've had a lot of buyers before come back later without their realtor and tell me I was not aware. I didn't know I had 3 days. That wasn't made. That wasn't told. I wasn't told, right? So just make sure that realtors, you're telling your buyers, and buyers, make sure you're setting some deadlines. This is a big thing I tell all my clients, put a reminder on your calendar, right? If you've got the reminder there on your calendar, you set an alarm, now it's pretty tough to forget it. And that's an important thing. Number 2, an inspection contingency. So a lot of different things can pop up that would make a transaction fall apart due to inspection. It could be something just big and scary. The roof is leaking in 3 different spots. There's no negotiation that could make that buyer want to feel comfortable moving forward. And so they say, hey, we want off the hook. Can we get off the hook? Yes, as long as you're within the inspection period, you can get off for virtually any reason, right? I always tell people you can literally say you don't like the color of the light bulbs and you're out, right? It is what it is. Now, when a buyer comes back to the seller and says, we don't like X, they're going to propose a solution. And it's usually one of 2 things, either repair it or give us money for it, right? Either one, right? Usually it's the money, but not always. And it depends on the loan type and a bunch of other things. But usually it's money. I'd say it's money 80, 90% of the time, right? So let's say you've got a AC and the AC is 18 years old. It's working just fine, but it's supposed to give you, I forget what the state standard is. I think it's 14 degrees difference. You're supposed to get 14 degrees difference. When you turn it on, you don't get the 14 degrees, you get 12 degrees, right? So it's still working, it's working fine, but you can tell it's a little bit older. Maybe it hasn't been serviced, whatever the problem is. So the buyer says, listen, this AC, if it goes out and it's 18 years old, is going to cost me about $7,000. Let's split it. Obviously, I've only got, maybe months left on this thing with the fact that we're down to 12 degrees instead of 14. Give me a $3,500 credit and I will take on the AC issue. Now, the seller can say sure, and as soon as they sign, boom, the buyer's committed. They're moving forward. The seller can say no, and they can throw it back in the buyer's lap, and either the buyer says, okay, fine, no is the answer, let's move forward, or, okay, if no is the answer, I'm going to back out, and then they get their deposit back, right? Or you can negotiate. Maybe the seller says, I'm not willing to give you that much. I'll give you $2,000. I'm not going to give you $3,500. And then it goes back to the buyer. And the buyer can say yes or no or negotiate further, right? And it keeps going back and forth until either the deal falls apart and the buyer gets their deposit back, or everybody agrees on some sort of negotiation. You all sign the paperwork and you move forward. It doesn't matter which happens, but that is one way that a deal dies, right? Now, there are a lot of little things that go into an inspection. Okay. I love to do pre-listing inspections. Why? Because all the things that could be scary, if the buyer knows before they put their offer in, and they also know they might be competing against other buyers, they tend to minimize how big those issues are, right? I'm thinking as a listing agent. So now I'm going to get those nice, strong offers, and I'm not going to get people who are scared during the inspection period process, right? I don't 100% control that, but odds are they're going to be less scared because they've already seen what the problems are. Here's another one. If buyers think the seller's lying to them, whether they're lying or not, a lot of times they'll back out because they just don't trust it. They get a bad feeling. They don't want to work with the sellers, right? So I tell sellers, if you know something, we can work on how it's communicated to a buyer, and we can present it in the most beautiful light possible. We can repair it. We can do a bunch of different things, but do not lie, right? If you lie, whether they find out or not, you're putting yourself in a bad position. If they find out, the odds of you losing them goes up. If they don't find out and they close, and then they find out, you are in a huge risk situation. And I've seen it before. Will people close? All of a sudden, this issue pops up. The buyer can prove that the seller knew about it. Now there's a lawsuit. Maybe you got to take that house back, damages, attorney fees, all kinds of stuff, right? So it can crush somebody. My suggestion is do not lie on your disclosures, right? Third one is financing. You got a financing contingency in any deal. And I'm going to skip ahead. Let's put a stick in this one. We'll come back to it. I'm going to skip to number 4, which is part of the financing contingency, depending upon how the deal is written, but the appraisal contingency, right? Meaning the home's got to appraise for a certain amount. If it doesn't, now we've got 4 options, right? So let's go to a $500,000 home. You sign up for 500, everybody's at 500. Appraisal comes back and it's at 490, right? We got 4 options. Number 1, seller drops their price to 490. That's obviously what the buyer would love, but it's got to happen for the lender to say, hey, I will actually loan on this property, because they're going to loan based on 490, right? Number 2, the buyer agrees to come up with an additional $10,000 to cover that gap. So they're going to fund the 490, and maybe it's a 10% down loan. So now instead of needing 50 grand on a $500,000 loan, they only need 49 grand because it's a $490,000 loan. But they got to come up with that additional 10 grand in cash, right? That's option 2. Option 3 is some sort of negotiated variance of what we just spoke of, right? So maybe they drop the price 5 grand and the buyer comes up with 5 grand cash, or maybe it's 7 and 3 or 8 and 2. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it equals the totality of that gap, you guys are good. You can move forward, right? Here's number 4. The deal falls apart, right? So buyer and seller say, hey, I'm not dropping my price. I'm not coming up. Wherever those 2 numbers are, whether you're negotiating or not, they're not meeting, and the deal falls apart. Okay, buyer gets their escrow deposit back. In most cases, that's how they're usually written. And they go find another house. Seller is now in a position where if it's a government-backed loan, VA or FHA, that appraisal is stuck with that property for 6 months. So if I got an FHA buyer who gets an appraisal for 490, now any other buyer I get in the next 6 months who is FHA, that lender is going to see that 490. I need to, as a listing agent, inform my seller of that, so they realize we're not in as an advantage. We're not in as advantageous. My gosh, it's Friday. A position as we normally would be, because we've got this lower appraisal on file. So just remember that, right? So that's appraisal. Coming back to number 3, which is the financing. There are a lot of things that could make financing fall apart, right? They could have looked at the credit incorrectly. Maybe they missed something and the score looked good, but when they looked at the detailed report, they didn't like that, right? Or maybe they looked at the detailed report, liked it, but then they see the score and they're like, don't like it. I had another one just recently. There was a bankruptcy. The lender saw the bankruptcy and said, I'm pretty sure we can get through this because of this, this, and this. It went to the underwriter, and 2 to 3 weeks later, the underwriter said, nope, not going to let it happen. Deal fell apart, right? We got to put back together with another lender, but because of the loan products that person had, they didn't have a loan product that would allow them to take that bankruptcy. So that deal fell apart with that lender, right? So a lot of different things can happen with financing. My biggest suggestion here, especially for realtors, but for sellers, is you want to see as much as possible when you're looking at your buyer, right? So let me tell you what looks phenomenal, and then anything I discuss that's missing makes it look a little less phenomenal every time, right? I want to see proof of funds without having to ask for it, because if you can show me on a $500,000 home with 10% down, that's 50 grand. But I also know you've got about 3.5% in closing costs, right? That's 17.5. 17.5 and 50 is 67.5. Show me $70,000 in cash. If you can show me that you've got liquid 70 grand, I'm comfortable. I'm looking for one of two things, either a letter from the bank or a bank statement, but they got to have four things on them. They've got to have the bank name, right? Let's say it's Wells Fargo. They got to have the name of whoever's on that offer. I've seen mom and dad's name on it. I don't care. It's not in your name, right? So you could easily say, well, I don't have the money. I can't move forward. I want the money in your account, right? Or, hey, I'm getting a settlement. Go get the settlement, then come back, right? Or, hey, my buddy's going to gift me the money. Number one, he hasn't gifted it. Number two, the lender hasn't said that they would accept it. So get it done and then tell the lender he would accept it. And now I'll say yes. All right. So we talked about bank name, your name, a date within the last 2 weeks. I want to see that it's, somewhat recent. Otherwise, you could have blown all that money. Who knows? And number four is an amount that I'm happy with, which here in this example would be $70,000, right? Now, I go so far because I've been taken advantage of on this. If you've got a VA offer that's 0% down, right? But you've got closing costs. Those closing costs, depending upon a lot of different things, are probably going to be around 4.5%, but let's say 4. So on a $400,000 deal times 4%, that's 16 grand. Most listing agents are not asking for proof of funds on that. I am. Why? Because one time I didn't, and the person ended up getting to closing and saying, hey, I'm 2 grand short. Can I borrow some money from the seller? I said, what do you mean you're 2 grand short? All you're paying for is your closing costs. It's 0% down, and you told us you were approved. Yeah, well, we didn't have the cash. We thought we would get this money, but we didn't get this money. That's my fault. That is my fault. So I learned this many years ago. Everybody, because remember, I represent the seller in this situation, everybody's going to show their proof of funds. And if you're a buyer, you want to show proof of funds. It makes you look better, especially in a multiple offer situation. So get that proof of funds in, right? What else do you want? You want an approval letter. All right. There's a difference between a pre-approval and a pre-qualification. A pre-approval generally goes through more steps, more hoops to ensure that that buyer is good and sound, right? In fact, you can go so far in your approval process, you can actually go through underwriting. Not a lot of people offer this, but when I see an offer that comes in and they say, hey, we've gone through full underwriting, we can close in 10 to 14 days. I'm thinking, this is awesome. This is beautiful. The odds that this deal falls apart are incredibly low, right? So if you've got a lender who can do that, a realtor who's smart enough to do it, and a buyer who's aggressive enough to get it done, that looks sharp. Okay. I also want to see the least amount of contingencies possible. We're talking about financing here. So specifically with financing, if you've got a cash offer, I don't need to worry about appraisal. It doesn't matter what the appraisal is because there's no lender, right? They don't care. It's your decision on whether this home is worth it or not. Okay. Unless they add an appraisal contingency, but most people don't, because you're paying money to somebody to tell you what a home is worth when you've got a realtor you're already paying who can tell you, practically the same thing, right? There's a difference between a market analysis done by a realtor and an appraisal done by an appraiser. But generally speaking, they're very, very similar things that are going to give you the market value of that property. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. Job loss. I've seen it before. In fact, I'm dealing with one right now where you get almost to closing in a week, 2 weeks before, maybe a day before, there's a job loss. Well, here's the thing. Number one, that lender is making their decision based on what you've told them as a buyer. So if you have job loss, you should be telling your lender this, right? Well, if the lender knows you got job loss, they got to recalculate everything. It could extend it. You could lose the deal. In fact, in a lot of situations, you're gonna. A situation where you wouldn't, the wife is making 400 grand, the husband's making 30 grand, and you're buying a house that's 4.25, and the husband loses his $30,000 job. Are they still going to be able to buy the house? Probably, right? But that's not the case. Most situations, people are making 60, 80, $100,000. They're within, 10, 20, 30 grand of each other, and they need both the incomes. If one falls off, now they're not going to be approved. So that's something you definitely want to discuss with your lender, right? And you're gonna want to create a plan for that. I've seen these things come together and happen. Right now, I've got one and we're making it happen. But again, it takes a very knowledgeable, very experienced lender and realtor and a proactive, intelligent, how would I word this? I'll just say proactive. Someone who gets tasks done quickly, buyer, right? A lot of buyers, not a lot of buyers, some buyers will be told, hey, I need you to do A, B, and C. We're trying to rush this through. We're kind of set behind here because your job lost. So if you can help us with this and get it done in the next 24 hours, we're set way ahead. Let's do it. and then 48 hours later, it's still crickets, right? So we need a great buyer, we need a great lender, we need a great realtor, and if we have all those things, sometimes we can keep those together. But job loss is a big one, right? Number 6, a large purchase by the buyer between the time they go under contract and the time they close. I've seen people buy boats. I've seen people buy other houses, especially income properties, right? They're not thinking that that's linked to their approval process. They'll go out and buy some toy, pick your toy, it doesn't matter. Four-wheelers, cars, whatever, it doesn't matter. And because that large purchase offsets the cash that they have, or their debt to income ratios, or their credit score because they just pulled a loan out for it, or whatever it is, all of a sudden you're not approved for that loan, right? So I always inform my buyers, hey, once you're approved, no major purchases. If you're going to make any purchases over $1,000, talk to the lender first, make sure that they're comfortable with it, and make sure you make all of your payments, your student loan payments, your credit card payments, your whatever payments you got, make them. We want to keep your credit where it's at or better, and we want to keep your debt to income ratios where they're at or better, right? If you're gonna make one of these big decisions, let the lender know first so they can say, hey, that'll kill the deal, or no, you're okay to make that deal, right? For that purchase. Now you're in full control. Number 7, I want to go back to large purchase. As a seller, what protection do you have over them making a large purchase? Virtually none. There are things that you could do, but it'd be, in my opinion, in this industry, could I write something up that says, as a listing agent, buyer agrees not to make any purchases over $1,000 without consulting their lender first, and that lender approving the fact that it will not kill their deal? Yes. Have I ever seen that? No. How many buyer's agents would feel comfortable with that? Not to mention buyers, not a lot. Should they? I would love it as a buyer's agent. I would say, whew, we're tightening this deal up. I love it. My buyer, if they're intelligent, should love it too, because they don't want to make large purchases without, informing the lender. So why wouldn't we do it? But that's just not the way people are, right? So you would risk losing a deal or rubbing people the wrong way. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but that is the one way to protect yourself, right? Now, if they do make that large purchase and they didn't talk to their lender, you would have recourse as a seller that you wouldn't otherwise have. Okay, number 7, credit drop. Typically, a credit drop is either going to happen because you took out that large loan for that toy we were just talking about, or you have some sort of non-payment. And I've seen it before, right? Where you're making payments because you got to get that house. Now that we're under contract, the thought on the buyer's side is, hey, we made the payment, we're good. Now we can quit making payments on this thing. And they quit making payments. And then when they do a check, usually within 10 days of closing, they're going to see, oh my gosh, the credit score went from a 737 to a 620. What is going on? Oh my gosh, we got 2 non-payments. That's a problem. And now you risk losing the loan, right? Number 8, this isn't a fun one. Death, right? People die. And if people die, they're off the hook. They do not have to purchase the home, okay? And when I say people die, they don't have to purchase the home. I mean, whoever's on the top portion of that first page on the contract. So if it's a couple and one of them dies, that other buyer who's alive does not have to purchase the home because it's changed. However, if you've got 2 friends purchasing a home and only one of them is on it, even though the other one has verbally agreed, hey, I'm going to make payments, I'm going to blah, 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 blah. If they die, doesn't matter. You can still purchase the home because on the contract, it was just the one person. Who got approved? The one person. So you're good. All right. However, I'm going to buy a house and my buddy Bob verbally agrees, hey, I'll take over and, I'll make half the payments and everything else. And when you go to sell, I want half of the profits. Let's say that's all verbal, which my gosh, don't ever do. Now, if Joe dies, Bob has no recourse. He cannot purchase the home. There is a section that allows the buyer to transfer the name to somebody else. So instead of Joe, it's Bob, or instead of Joe, it's Joe and Bob, or it's a company, or it's whatever. But in order to do that, I would need either a document that allows somebody to do that beforehand, or I would have to do it before I died. So a death pretty much kills probably 97, 98% of deals. How do you protect from that? You don't. I mean, unless you want to find buyers who eat vegetables and take their vitamins and work out. I don't know how you protect against that one, right? Number 9, the buyer and seller talking. I have not dealt with this one a lot. In fact, I don't know if I've dealt with it at all. I have had issues because buyers and sellers talk. But I've never lost a deal because of it. But I know agents who have. So it typically happens in a couple different places. The original showing, sellers or buyers will give away too much information that later is taken advantage of, sometimes outside of the contract, and it can kill you. Not kill you literally, but kill the deal. That's why I do not like showing homes where sellers or listing agents are there. Get out. This is our showing. A lot of listing agents want to be there because they want to sell the house, and they're also trying to pull information from buyers. So anytime I walk into a house and there's a listing agent there, I say, hey, I've read through, I appreciate it, but we'd prefer if we can get a private showing. And sometimes they'll sit out and sometimes they won't, right? But I request it because, again, I'm representing my buyer. Another time is the inspection. As a seller, as an owner, you should, it's etiquette. You don't have to follow this etiquette. It's not like, not every realtor would agree with what I'm about to say. You should leave the property, right? Why? Out of respect for the buyer. The buyer should be able to sit with the inspector, watch what that inspector is doing, ask questions, because the buyer wants to feel comfortable with the inspection. It's probably the scariest part of the whole process. Once you get through, the emotions of the financing, it's the scariest part. And what we see is sellers who stay there sometimes just because they don't want to leave and they want to cook their mac and cheese for lunch and they want to feed their dog and they want to watch Price is Right. Like, I get it. Sometimes they want to stay there because they're trying to pull info on the buyer. Here's the challenge with that. Pulling info, giving info, whatever, the more info that's given, the greater likelihood there is of this deal falling apart. So I've seen inspections that normally would have gone well, but something that's this big of a deal on an inspection report, the seller will throw a fit in front of the buyer and the inspector. And I can give a lot of these different scenarios and say, that's not a big deal. We haven't had that issue, blah, blah. And then they'll say, we had that pop up 2 years ago. We fixed it and it hasn't been a problem since. I don't know why you're marking it. And then the buyer comes back to the buyer's agent and says, we signed disclosures and those disclosures were clean. They said there were no problems. This seller just said that they had an issue 2 years ago and they didn't disclose it. Is that legal or illegal? Well, they were supposed to disclose everything. All right, now I don't trust them. I want to back out. It happens all the time. You want, as a buyer and a seller, to stay away from the other party. Most people are nice, and most people, when they want to get together, it's not because they're trying to get intel or take advantage of people. It's because they just want to meet the people who are helping them move forward, right? You're helping me sell my house. Thank you so much. Or you're helping me by selling me your house. Thank you so much. That's usually the intent, but sometimes things can slip out of your mouth with the greatest of intent, and it ends up killing a deal. The third time that you see people getting together and it can end in a train wreck is the final walkthrough, right? At the final walkthrough, the seller will think, hey, this is a done deal. We're signing papers today or tomorrow. Now I can tell them, hey, you've got this little issue here. You got this little issue here. I know it didn't pop up on the inspection, but this thing, you're going to want to, pay this company $30 a month. They'll come out and fix it. But whoa. I didn't know about this. And again, I can give several scenarios of things that will kill deals that a seller will share or a buyer will share, and it kills the deal. I'm telling you, just stay away. I know you want to be nice. I know your intent is good, but you could accidentally say something. Realtors are professionals. They have a license. They do this every day. And I see realtors dropping information on their clients to me that they shouldn't, right? So if they do it, I guarantee buyers and sellers, especially with great intent and not thinking, how do we make this deal close? They're thinking, I want to be nice to this person. They're going to allow things to come out of their mouth. So just be careful with that. Last thing, and this is a big one, and this can happen in the beginning, or it can happen towards the end, or anywhere in between, right? Someone gives a verbal term, a negotiation. The other party says, okay, I agree. And then when we go to put it in writing, the original person changes the terms. And I'm going to give you a phenomenal example. I had someone once, I was the listing agent, who came to me, the buyer's agent came to me and said, hey, we got ABC issue, whatever the issue was. We're asking for $1,500. If your seller will give $1,500, we'll agree to move forward. I said to my seller, hey, would you do $1,500? This is what the issue's for, blah, blah, blah. Yes, we'll do $1,500. Then when the addendum came back, it said $1,650, right? $150. And this is on a $400,000 or $500,000 home. Who cares about $150? But when that seller saw it, they said, "What is this 150 for?" And the buyer said, "Well, after I talked about the $1,500 number, I talked to my cousin. He said it's probably going to cost me $1,650 to do it, so we upped the number to $1,650." At that point, you're losing 90% of people. They don't care. It could be $1. They would have worked with you up front, but now because you presented them something verbally and they accepted it and you changed your mind, they don't trust you. And people will back out over $150. I've seen it. So, what is my suggestion? Always put it in writing. Always put it in writing. And if you're asked as a buyer's agent or a listing agent to present something to your client, always say, "I'd love to present that." Get that in writing, send it over to me, and I'll get it presented later this afternoon. Always. Because I'm telling you, as a realtor, if you present that verbal and then they change their mind, right? Not your client says yes, but the other side changes their mind. You also look bad. And that hurts your relationship with your client, right? So do not do verbals. Yes, it's fast. Yes, it's easy. Yes, it works out 95% of the time, but 5 to 10% of the time, it can ruin relationships and it can kill deals, right? All right, we got a comment here. I have not read it, from Katie Cave, who is a wonderful local realtor here in Port St. Lucie. Just showed a property where the seller was there because she said her agent made her. She then told me what it appraised for when the previous deal fell through, which was way under asking. LOL, another reason not to have your sellers there. That is a phenomenal example. I appreciate that, Katie, of what could happen if you have a seller and a buyer talking, right? And you might think, well, what does it matter? Because if my buyer is there, I'm the buyer's agent, and we are paying $500,000 for your home, and it previously fell apart on a $500,000 offer, but the appraisal came in at $450,000, right? But let's say my buyer's cash. With cash, there's no contingency on appraisal. As a seller, you're good. You're in the driver's seat. If we get through this inspection, we're sitting pretty. But now, and Katie didn't say this, so I'm guessing this wasn't what happened. If the buyer is present, right, and hears that, they could use the inspection contingency to either get out of the deal or negotiate the price because they knew the appraisal came in short. All you're doing is hurting yourself, right? So Katie, great example of why you want to keep the two parties separate. Again, I know everybody's got great intent. I know everybody wants to do these nice things for the other side. They appreciate the other side. I tell you what, get them a closing gift, right? That's what you should do. Get them a closing gift, write them a nice note, and then on closing, after closing, you can present it to them. That's the way to appreciate them. But Katie, thank you again for your input. Guys, I appreciate you joining me like we do every Friday at 11:15. If you've got any topics you'd like me to bring up, or if you have any questions or comments on this topic, feel free to put it down in the comments. And as always, I will get back to you. Have a phenomenal Friday and an even better weekend.